Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, Jethro Tull podcast. My name's Joey Vetter.
My name's Eugene Manko.
And today we're taking a look at Under Wraps, released in 1984. If you're a fan of the podcast and are feeling generous, you can support us on Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. Any donations will go right back into the production of the podcast by helping us cover our editing costs. Again, that's ko-fi.com/vernacularverbose. So this is an episode that I've been looking forward to since we first started the podcast. Under Wraps, of course, as I'm sure most Tull fans know, is kind of the infamous 80s album that 90% of the fan base hates with a burning passion. And this is pretty exciting for me because, as I think a lot of people, if you know me, I guess, on the Tull, online community or whatever, you may know that by now that I'm a very big fan of this album. I genuinely love this album. I've always loved this album. I listen to it all the time in my spare time, and I still like this album even today. And I'm excited to talk about it for that reason, but also because this is an album that is one of the least discussed Tull albums, I would say, at least, beyond just pure unbridled hatred for it. I think it's one of the albums that the band themselves have not talked a lot about, probably because of the, fan backlash or what have you. So it's kind of an album that is somewhat mysterious in that regard and doesn't have a lot said about it in public. And also just because for me as a Tull fan, I very rarely get the opportunity to discuss this album with anybody else. And so, Eugene, I know that you've told me before that until today, when we were prepared for this podcast, this wasn't an album that you were super familiar with. So I'm also,
that is true.
Yeah. So I'm also excited just to get the opportunity to discuss this album with someone who, up to this point, wasn't that familiar with it.
Yeah, that's correct. I didn't listen to this album a lot, and there was a large period of time when I never came back to it, and as probably many Tull fans did, when they first heard it, they thought, what the hell is that? And never played it again. And it was very interesting to examine what they did with their sound, try to understand why they made these decisions. I can't say I'm converted to an Under Wraps fan. It still probably isn't one of my favorite Tull albums, but I do have things I have to say about it.
Yeah, my goal in this episode is definitely not conversion, so no worries there. I wasn't expecting to be able to convert anybody. I think I'll just first off say that anybody who's listening to this, they may kind of expect me to give this very long, full-throated defense of the album and why I like it and that kind of thing. And I'm sorry to disappoint that I don't really have a lot that I can say from an objective perspective. What I can say is that, first off, I'm sure a big reason that I like this album is because of nostalgia. Because I think, as I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, my experience with Tull very much started with my dad's cassette collection. And one of the cassettes that we had was Under Wraps. And it was probably the cassette that was played the most in our car for me growing up. So even back when I was very young, before I knew anything about Tull, before I cared about Tull at all, or even music at all, this album was kind of just background music to a lot of my life growing up. And so I was always very familiar with it for that reason. And I'm sure undoubtedly I would feel different about the album if I heard it for the first time today.
Yeah. One of the things that surprises me, actually, about this album is not the way it sounds and not the way that some people don't like it in the context of Jethro Tull. The thing that surprises me about it is that it wasn't popular at the time. And I really, when I was listening to it, I really wanted to kind of get into that side of things and examine that, because this was a very popular sound, right? The whole new wave synth pop sort of thing was very much in vogue. And the first band my mind went to when I was thinking about it was Genesis, because they've been transitioning to a pop band for a long time, and with them, of course, it wasn't sudden. It was a very gradual process. But the self-titled album by Genesis that was released in 1983, a year before Under Wraps, was a hit album on I think several charts, or at least one, and the single "Mama" on that album was I think number one in the UK, and it was kind of a weird song, but still a pop song. And then, of course, in 1986, Genesis released Invisible Touch, which became a multi-platinum thing, with Invisible Touch being a hit single in the US. And I kind of listened to these albums a little bit to try and understand why people were so much into Genesis and weren't a lot into Jethro Tull, because I think Under Wraps reached number 18 on the charts.
Yeah.
Then I read a little bit what Ian Anderson has to say on the remastered, the early 2000s remastered version. And he said it kind of sounds, this version of Jethro Tull sounds a little bit like a cross between The Police and Thomas Dolby. And I went and listened a little bit to The Police and Thomas Dolby, because I'm not massive fan of The Police, and yeah, the album Synchronicity by The Police sounds even a lot more than like Under Wraps than the songs by Genesis. It made me wonder, well, the Police sound was very popular, like Synchronicity was their most popular album by far. Why did people not get into the same thing done by Jethro Tull? Because they didn't do it too badly. It was just not something people would have expected from them. So I do have some kind of vague idea why it didn't kind of connect with people as much. But I'm not sure. I think a lot of it is just chance.
Yeah, I think another important part of the conversation in terms of Tull's popularity at this time and the impact that Under Wraps had was, if you look at the live side of the band, this is kind of the period in which their venues started to change. They started playing smaller venues. Their ticket sales started going down a bit. If you compare this to the Broadsword Tour, for example, which I don't know what the Broadsword Tour was like in the US, but I know in Europe at least they were still playing really big places like arenas and stuff like that. So you can kind of point to this as the time when Tull's popularity, I think, began to wane a bit, and it started to become more of I think they started to transition more into kind of like a golden oldies band. I don't think that transition was complete yet, but I think it was on the way to happening, which is the kind of thing that happens to pretty much any, band of that era after a certain period of time. That being said, from a musical perspective, I would actually make an argument that there's some innovative stuff happening on Under Wraps, even outside of just looking at it through the Tull framework. And some of it may just be because I'm not familiar enough with, other music of the period, like the Police and Genesis and that kind of thing. But when I think of electronic rock and the electronic rock that I've listened to, the music on this album is different from a lot of those kinds of, that style of music. And that's what makes it partly interesting to me, is I think a lot of the music on this album, it's really energetic, it's really intense, at least for Tull standards. And a lot of it is really quite progressive. And that's kind of why I understand what people are going for when they say that this is a pop album or that they were trying to make pop songs or that kind of thing. And there's a couple of tracks where I can kind of see that. But for the most part, I don't consider the songs in this album pop songs. I think there's a lot of progressive influence that is not uncharacteristic of Tull, even just in the past couple albums. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, to me, it feels like there is an attempt to make pop songs on this album, because a lot of these songs to me don't really feel like the songs Tull wrote and then continued writing after it. So the songwriting on this album feels to me very different, apart from a couple songs probably. But in terms of comparison, you will be probably familiar with one of the hit singles from Synchronicity by The Police, which is Every Breath You Take.
Yeah.
But that song doesn't really sound like anything on Under Wraps at all. But another hit single from that album, which I checked that it was a hit single, King of Pain. So if you don't know this song, look it up. Sounds very much like songs on Under Wraps. That's the kind of thing that was pop music at the time. And there's another song on Genesis, on Invisible Touch by Genesis, which didn't come out for 2 years, which would have come out 2 years after Under Wraps was released, which the song Land of Confusion on that album sounds very much like Lap of Luxury.
Yeah, Lap of Luxury is I'll save my thoughts on it for when we talk about it, but
Yeah.
that's one song on the album that I would say is the most obvious attempt at creating like an 80s pop song that I would agree with. So one thing that's interesting about that is, maybe you might hear this album and think that maybe there was a lot of label pressure to, try to conform the band to what was popular at the time or that kind of thing. But the truth is actually the opposite, which is very interesting. And some of the interviews that the band, and some of the, the few interviews where the band has talked about this album, it's usually interviews with Martin who talks about it the most. But he mentioned that this was kind of the first album that the band ever did where they completely shut themselves off from the record company during the entirety of recording. So it was done all in Ian's house, in like a home studio, and nobody from the label had heard anything from the album until it was finished. And if you've seen the Jethro Tull Classic Artist documentary, there's kind of a scene where they talk a little bit about this, where there was kind of a day when Terry Ellis came in to listen to the final mixes for the first time. And apparently he was extremely drunk because he had just come from the horse races where he lost all of his money or something. And because he was so drunk, he only listened to the album through his right ear only because he couldn't put his headphones on correctly. And he absolutely hated it, and he lashed out at them, and there was a huge drama about it. And Terry Ellis hated it. So that's kind of an interesting example of how a lot of these changes, they came from Tull himself. It wasn't, from what it sounds like, it wasn't a label pressure thing.
Yeah, I never thought it was a label pressure thing. I think some of it is clearly the influence of Peter Vitesse,
yeah,
who was the young musician in Tull at the time, and who was into all of that technological stuff. And he was interested in doing that, and Tull were interested in trying to incorporate that.
Yeah, it's definitely important to mention Peter Vitesse when you talk about this album, because his influence is even greater than that on Broadsword. And I think it's also necessary to mention Walk Into Light, which was Ian's first solo album, which was released a year before Under Wraps. And in a lot of ways, Walk Into Light is kind of a sister album to Under Wraps.
Absolutely.
They were both... Walk Into Light was billed as an Ian Anderson solo album, but it was essentially an Ian and Peter Vitesse collab album when you look at the writing credits and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because collab albums between Ian and the keyboardist it wasn't a one-off thing, right? Because Divinities was Ian plus Andrew Giddings. So it's kind of funny to look at it like that. It's a shame that an Ian Anderson and Deep Palmer solo album didn't happen.
Yeah, that would have been cool. If you listen to Walk Into Light and Under Wraps kind of back to back, I think it's extremely obvious that there's a lot of things they share. Just sonically, they sound very, very similar. So
yeah, that way probably people wouldn't have been as surprised by the sound of Under Wraps, because some of them would have been if they missed the solo album. But otherwise, there's a very clear trajectory.
Yeah. So the big elephant in the room comes when we talk about the member lineup for this album.
Yes.
So Ian Anderson on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, and I guess various keyboards, we can say. Martin Barre on electric guitar. Dave Pegg on bass. Peter John Vitesse on keyboards. And famously, nobody on drums, because this album featured a drum machine which was all programmed by Ian.
Yeah. Nobody's drum kit.
Right. So, people might expect, because I'm a drummer and because I love this album, that I may, again, I may have some kind of long defense about the drum machine. But all I can really say is that it really doesn't bother me that much. That's really all I can say about it. I think the drum programming on this album is extremely creative. It's not at all the kind of thing that you would expect from, typical drum machine programming on, 90% of the tracks at least. And I don't know, it's just never been that big of a deal for me. And maybe that's because I grew up with it. Part of me wonders, maybe this isn't fair for me to say, but, Tull fans, I would assume, most of the music that they enjoy and that they listen to the most are, other artists of the similar era. So, maybe classic rock, we could broadly say progressive rock, that kind of thing. Usually a genre that doesn't feature a lot of drum machine or, electronic sounds at all mostly. So, part of me thinks that maybe most Tull fans just aren't really used to hearing drum machines, that they don't listen to a lot of electronic rock. I'm not trying to sound pretentious in saying that. That's just kind of something that I've considered, that maybe that's part of where all the hatred comes from. But I don't know. It's just not that big of a deal to me. Obviously I would be really interested to hear what this album sounds like with a live drummer. By the way, let me use that opportunity to plug something very interesting that I've just done recently. The past several months, I have recorded an entire full album cover of this album with live drums, with the goal of playing the original drum machine parts in every song. And if you like, you can listen to that on YouTube at my YouTube channel, Vetter Drums, as I've kind of tried to provide that to the world. So Under Wraps with live drums, you can finally hear it. So, I'm sure the drum parts on this album would have been much different if a real drummer played them. But at the end of the day, it just isn't that big of a deal to me. But how do you feel about it?
I think my main problem with the drums on this album is not the fact that it's a drum machine, but the way the drums are mixed. Mm-hmm. Because to me, they sound incredibly harsh. Mm-hmm. And if comparing the if I compare these to the drums on the Synchronicity by the Police or Genesis, they are on these albums. Drums are mixed much kind of in a milder way. They don't stick out so much. They don't overpower everything like the buttery biscuit bass. And of course, in Genesis, that wasn't a drum machine, right? That was an electronic drum kit played by Phil Collins. And some of the feel of the drums may probably stem from that, because even if it's a really, really consistent drummer, a live drumming on an electronic drum kit will still sound a little bit different from a very, very regular metronomic drum machine. And you mentioned Walk Into Light. I really don't have a problem with the drum machines on Walk Into Light, because I feel they're mixed better. They don't kind of grate on the ears, especially the very, very loud drum machine snare. Mm-hmm. That's louder than the vocals. It's louder than everything on the album. So there are a couple things that I have a problem with on Under Wraps universally, I think. And the drum mixing is one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And not even just the mixing on the drums, but just sonically, this entire album is, it sounds extremely aged. It's one of the most aged sounding Tull albums. And that's why I'm really hoping that they eventually do give this a remix. I'm not holding out hope that they will, but I think, this, as I've said, this and Broadsword are the two Tull albums that I really think could benefit the most from a modern day remix. So I hope that happens.
Yeah, I don't think they are planning it at the moment, because they might probably believe that it's beyond salvaging, but we shall see.
It is pretty crazy. One thought that I have when I listen to this album is, it's really crazy how this is the same band that made Thick as a Brick and A Passion Play and that kind of thing.
Well, kind of the same band. Two people.
Yeah. You can make an argument that it kind of wasn't the same band. It was just, the two longest lasting people. But I don't know. It is pretty crazy, though, just to hear Ian on this album and think that's the same guy from 1972 and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Especially because a big trait of this album, kind of a unique characteristic of this album, is Ian is really experimenting with his vocals a lot on this album.
Yeah.
Which I know people have different feelings about it. But, there's lots and lots of, that kind of thing. I don't know what the impetus was. That's part of why I would like a remix, because I would love to read the booklet and hear more about how this album came about. But that's kind of one of the interesting things about it that sets it apart.
Yeah, it's clearly different in that regard. I don't think he did that anymore.
Yeah.
After that.
So do you have any feelings on the cover art?
Not a lot. I don't mind it. I think it's kind of a striking image. Mm-hmm. Maybe not very Tull-like, but then, they did have a female figure on the cover before, and that's my favorite cover, which is A Passion Play. So I think graphically it's very good, and I like the kind of the crumpled Tull logo on the fabric there. I think they tried to sort of rebrand themselves with that logo.
Yeah, totally.
They had merch with it. They had like baseball caps, I think.
And it didn't really last that long.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. Of all the album covers of all the covers so far, I have the least to say on this one.
Uh-huh.
I think it's not bad. I think, like you said, it's very unusual for a Tull cover. It kind of stands out. The only thing I really have to comment on it is just like the insane 80s hair on the woman underneath, which is kind of funny to look at. The back cover of this album is actually kind of cool, although I guess I should clarify. The back cover that I am thinking of is the back cover to the 05 remaster, which I don't think was the actual back cover on the original album.
Mm-hmm.
But the back cover on the remaster is a photo of kind of garden, I guess you'd say, with a bunch of different items under wraps, including what looks like some people just standing there under wraps. And it looks like it was taken around the time of the album, but I don't know if it was actually used in the original release at all, but I think it's kind of a cool image.
Yeah, these same blankets with the Tull logo, just people wrapped in them. Yeah, it does look cool. I wonder if that were the cover of the album, if the album would have felt different, because of course the cover is what colors our perception of albums a lot.
Yeah. So speaking of the different releases of the album, this is kind of interesting because it's the first time that there's different track listings on different formats.
Mm-hmm.
So I originally thought that this was the first Tull CD, but when I was doing some research, I found out that no, actually Broadsword had a CD release in 1983 with the same track listing.
Uh-huh.
But this was the first Tull album where the CD and the vinyl released, I guess, concurrently or close to concurrently. So the CD
was also a cassette.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And I think that the track listing on the cassette was the same track listing as on the CD, and the vinyl was the one which was different.
The cassette track listing was not the same, and I know that because I grew up with the cassette. It's really strange. So I don't remember exactly how many tracks. I want to say the CD has, I think, 4 extra tracks, 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. 4.
And the cassette has all of the extra tracks except for Tundra and General Crossing. Or at least that's the cassette that I had growing up. I don't know if it's different by region or what.
Yeah, because I think I read on Wikipedia that the 15 track listing was the one on the cassette.
That's interesting. That definitely wasn't the case with the one that I grew up with. So I don't know if that was a regional thing or what. Because I actually heard Tundra and General Crossing for the first time when I got the CD remaster. So that's interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah. So what Wikipedia says. And it may be just a mistake on the Wikipedia page. What it says is the original 1984 release had 11 tracks, with Astronomy, Tundra, Automotive Engineering, and General Crossing only appearing on the cassette version. That's what it says.
Yeah, maybe it was true in Europe.
Yeah, could be. We could also check Discogs for that and see how the cassette release actually looked like at the time. It does look like the cassette releases from 1984 all have the 15-track version.
Huh, that's weird.
So yeah, yours must have been some kind of reissue. We should look it up. We should find what kind of cassette you have.
I remember distinctly that it was missing those 2 tracks, so I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
But anyway, the bonus, so if you want to call them bonus tracks on the CD, they're actually mixed in with the original track listing. They're not all just, put in at the end as, like a typical bonus track. So that makes me think that the CD was the intended track listing. And so for that reason, that's the track listing that we're going to be going through today.
Yeah, probably. They're at the end of the respective sides of the cassette, and as if the sides of the vinyl record were longer. Mm-hmm. So they're tacked on to the end of side 1 and end of side 2, with Astronomy, Tundra going on A, and Automotive Engineering and General Crossing going on B.
Mm-hmm. Track 1, Lap of Luxury. So right off the bat, I would have to say that this album actually starts with one track which is not one of my favorites off the album. And as I mentioned previously, this is kind of one song that I will definitely concede is, at least comes across as an attempt at creating sort of a generic 80s pop song.
Yeah, I will agree with that. It does feel like that to me. This was the moment when I started listening to it and went to see like hit singles by Genesis and the Police and kind of get a feel for why these became hits and Lap of Luxury didn't. And it feels like they really like Jethro Tull really attempted to kind of make a simpler song.
Yeah.
Kind of a little dumb it down a little, because like Mama by Genesis was a hit single, and it's not a simple song at all. And it's really weird with the drums and the groove coming in in the middle of the song, and it still was very successful. So I think they did themselves a disservice by trying to make a simpler, more kind of pop 3-chord pop song.
Yeah.
And this one.
This song actually had a music video, which I guess kind of factors into how they were pushing this one for charts and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I think it's on YouTube. There's not a lot to say about it. It's kind of Ian and the band walking around in an urban environment. There's not a lot to really mention. But yeah, I don't know. It's one thing I will say, this is not just for this song, but kind of the whole album. One of the most immediately apparent sonic things about this album is that the electric guitar sounds really strange.
Yeah.
On this whole album. I'm not technically knowledgeable enough to comment on what exactly is going on. Maybe it was like an 80s thing, I don't know. But it almost kind of sounds like it's underwater on the entire album. It sounds like it's under some kind of filter or something.
Could have been some kind of digital effect that they were into using at the time. It's interesting because Martin seems to like this album, actually.
Yeah, he said it's one of his favorite Tull albums.
I think you mentioned slap bass before on the Pine Martin's jig, but sounds like a little bit kind of slappy.
Yeah,
there is very clearly slap bass on this song at the end of the bridge.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
On Lap of Luxury, it's just classic, very, very 80s slap bass.
So speaking of Dave Pegg, he talks a little bit about this album in the Classic Artists documentary, where he mentions that he really didn't like it at the time, and he wasn't happy with kind of his place in the band at this time, but that he's come to appreciate it more, and he likes some of the songs more now.
Yeah, so like I said, this feels like an attempt at a simpler song, and if they made it more complex, I think it could have been successful as a single, because like Genesis still was putting out like songs like Tonight, 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 like with a whole 9 minutes of it, and it was still a successful pop song, obviously not a radio hit at 9 minutes, correct me if I'm wrong, dear listeners, but it's a famous song. And really, I have a theory about another song on this album, that there is a different song that could have been a big hit, or at least a moderately successful hit, more so than Lap of Luxury.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear what that is.
So, it's coming soon.
So I don't know, if I was Martin, I would be kind of miffed about how my part was treated on this album, because it just, the guitar just, it's really in the back. It very rarely ever stands out on the album. And I mean, if that was an artistic choice, fine. And I mean, Martin's happy with it, so who cares? But still, if I was the guitarist, I would be, I think it was pretty strange what happened on this album.
Yeah, the bridge on this song feels to me a little bit like Queen, like the solo guitar section. It does have a little bit of a Brian May feeling to it.
Yeah. There's
like
also
80s Queen, I mean.
There's a very dancey drum break towards the end, which is kind of funny. I guess it's kind of cute.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little about the lyrics on this song, because the lyrics they feel to me like a throwback to the times of the blues. Because if you forget the music and just read the lyrics, you can very easily imagine them sung to just like a standard 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
You can just go, the money won't last forever.
Yeah.
The rent man called twice a day. And just because it's a lament, basically, the whole song. It's a kind of a complaint of a person who wants to be richer than they are.
Yeah, and this is very obviously not a song which is coming from Ian Anderson, personally, because I have no doubt at this point he was already very wealthy.
Yeah, of course. He's putting himself in a mind of a character. That's what he's doing. Possibly, it's again an attempt to make a relatable song, but it feels disingenuous enough that I can imagine people wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah.
Right. Track 2, Under Wraps, number 1.
Wrapped up in your smile, wrapped in
first thing that kind of strikes me on this song and on the album as a whole, Ian was, like you said, experimenting with vocals a lot. And one of the things he did, apart from just singing in a different manner, which feels to me like he did, the singing in general on Under Wraps feels a lot different to what Ian was normally doing. But another thing he did, he overdubbed a lot. And not just like harmonic parts, but extra voices, utterances, and just general physical noises.
Yeah.
Paralinguistic, I think the term would be. And I don't know about you, because you like this album, you probably don't mind it. I find that extremely annoying. All the song names delivered in a low, intense voice, like Under Wraps, and all of that. I do not enjoy that.
So there's a lot of criticisms about this album that I totally understand, even if I don't share them. So, and that's kind of one of them, is that there's a lot of those kind of ad-lib parts that I quite like a lot, but like I totally understand how people can be annoyed by them, and it totally makes sense to me. And if I heard this album today in 2021 for the first time, I may have said the same thing. But a lot of them I like, and the thing that's kind of strange to me with those ad-libs on this song is just how like guttural and intense some of them sound, which is a little strange. But in general, I like the general structure of it, where it's sort of like a call and response type thing going on. And I'll save some of the discussion on this for the second version of this song, because those backing vocals also show up there, which I think was a really interesting choice. But no, I mean, I like them for the most part. I think it's cool, and it kind of drives a lot of the song.
I think these utterances, they are so different from the main vocal. Different in timbre and in intensity. They kind of throw me. And intensity is a term with this song and with some other songs as well I will be coming back to, because I kind of understand what the artistic idea in the song is, which is it's basically a love song. It's a song about the secret infatuation that the protagonist perceives as a kind of a spy story. They see themselves as a character who needs to keep a secret. And this sort of intensity is very much like they are imagining themselves to be on a mission, like being a secret agent kind of mission, but the whole mission is just them being in love with someone. And it's kind of the sense of urgency and intensity in the music doesn't really connect to me with the story. I get what they're driving at here, but it doesn't, to me, it kind of doesn't resolve into a feeling I can relate to. Well, when I tell myself this kind of story, I can relate to the feeling. I think it's something a lot of us would have felt at some point, but that feeling doesn't really sound like this song to me. That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, thankfully, there's literally an entire other version of the song, which I think, I mean, we'll see, but I think it kind of fits those lyrics a little better, maybe. When it comes to music, one of the things I like the most about this song is there's some amazing layered keyboard parts happening in the back.
The keyboard's arrangement is very nice on this one, I have to say. I
would encourage anybody to listen to this song and just focus solely on what the keyboard is doing through the whole song. Because there's some really amazing parts, sometimes not, kind of buried in the mix. But there's a lot of stuff changing throughout the song, and it's really amazing to listen to the keyboards in the song.
Yeah, that's right. I do agree with that.
I also like the I don't know how else I would say this, but I guess it's the drum claps, the ch-ch-ch-ch, that kind of appear up and down throughout the song. I like those a lot. There's a live video. I think it was in the UK, but you can find the entire show on YouTube. And even if you don't like this album, I would encourage you to check out some of it. There's a couple of songs they do off this album, and this is one of them. And really, every song they play off Under Wraps live, I think, is really good. I think it's really worth seeing. The energy of a lot of those songs really comes through really well in the live versions. And there's also kind of some cute stuff they do with the whole Under Wraps gimmick. So they started the show with all of the band's gear under wraps, under the blankets and things, and they had roadies come out and take them off. And there's even like like even the band members themselves are wrapped up on the stage before the show starts, and there's a lot of kind of clever stuff they do with that, which is kind of fun to watch.
Yeah. What about the costumes they were wearing during the live show? I seem to recall there was something about the way that they dressed on the tours for this album.
From the footage I've seen, I don't remember any uniforms aside from just like the baseball caps. Maybe you may be thinking of the roadies wore lab coats on this tour, which was cool.
Yeah, maybe thinking about that. But I seem to also remember like Ian was wearing like blue overalls or something.
That sounds kind of familiar.
Was this song difficult to play on live drums?
Kind of, because it's a little bit of a strange rhythm, and I mean it's an extremely repetitive pattern. I mean it's one of the most repetitive drum parts on the whole album, and it's a little odd, and especially in the way that the hi-hat, because there's kind of hi-hat open and closing throughout the rhythm, and it's a little tricky to get those to line up correctly. But I would say technically it's not that difficult of a part, but it's kind of strange in the way that it fits together.
Yeah, I just checked. He was wearing like jeans and a red short, which was like some kind of builder's uniform, or looked a little bit like that.
It's worth mentioning too that this was Don Perry's first tour actually, even though he had nothing to do with the album. And when they played the Under Wraps songs live, they actually had an electric drum kit on stage, which he would move to. So he would get up and move over to the electric kit. And for some reason, it was a standing kit, which looks kind of strange. So he's just standing playing. One of the things I've noticed about that is when he plays the electric kit on those songs, because he's standing, he's actually playing the kick drum with his hand also, which is crazy. I mean, I've played this entire album on drums, and I can't even imagine if you had to do that and you had to use one of your arms to play the kick too.
I don't think they did Saboteur, did they? That way.
No, that'd be crazy. Track 3, European Legacy. So this one's cool. I think I hear from some people who don't like this album that this is actually one that kind of stands out for some people. It has kind of a Latin influence, which is sort of interesting with the guitar and stuff like that. I don't really have a lot musically to say on this one. I would just say that lyrically, it's really interesting how relevant and this song still is today, about the relationship between the UK and Europe and that kind of thing. It's just kind of interesting to think about how relevant that has stayed over time.
Well, first thing that strikes me when this song comes on the album is how much quieter it is.
Yeah.
And I went to check, and it looks to me like this whole album is all over the place in terms of loudness. And I referenced it with Broadsword, which is much more consistent, if you don't include Cheerio, which is a very quiet song. That's obvious. And this is one of the 2 quietest songs on the album. And it's a shame, because this is the one that to me feels like if they made this a single, it would have been a hit. Because it's complex, it's quirky, and it still does have that new wave feel to it. But it also have a really Jethro Tull feel to it with the acoustic guitar. The acoustic parts remind me a little bit of like later Ian's acoustic solo albums, like The Secret Language of Birds. So yeah, I really believe that selecting Lap of Luxury as the single was a mistake, and European Legacy had massive potential.
That's interesting. I've never heard someone say that before.
Yeah, it's a really good 80s pop song, and I'm not in any derogatory way. I've said that before. I'm not a fan of the 80s sound. I find it difficult to enjoy that kind of production, and I never play like this Invisible Touch by Genesis, but I can see how that is a very good song, and I can see why it was so successful. And with this one, I think it could have been massively successful.
I really like you mentioned the 80s sound. There were things about Broadsword that I kind of derided as being 80s sound, and it probably sounds quite hypocritical for me on this album, because some of those similar sounds I actually praise on this album. And one of those, specifically on this song, I really like the thick key stabs that kind of come in before the bridge, where they kind of build up, and there's these very thick keys chords that sound very 80s, but I really like how they sound.
There's a lot of building up in this song because you've got like two halves of the verse that kind of contrast between themselves, and then the chorus that is another level of contrast. And then the double time bridge, which is also a very kind of even a different, for this album, different 80s thing, which is a very sparse kind of guitar arrangement over a beat.
Right.
I like, there's a very interesting flute flourish. It happens exactly once in this song. Between the second and the third verse, there's a flute line followed by a guitar line, and the flute line ends on a kind of thing that it doesn't even sound very typical for Ian. It's just a thing he came up with. It's very nice. In the lyrics, do you want to talk about the lyrics here?
Well, one more thing I'll just mention on the lyrics. I really love the concept of legacy and heritage in terms of, regional heritage, country heritage, that kind of thing. And some of it is kind of personal, just because for me as an American living abroad, living in Japan, one of the things that living abroad makes me think about all the time is kind of my own heritage and my own legacy of where I grew up and where I came from. So not just, an American heritage, but also, a North American heritage or a Western Hemisphere heritage, or, however you want to put it. Those things are really important, and you don't really realize how important they are and how much they've built the person you are until you live in a different country and a different culture. So just in that respect, I really like the idea of kind of the European legacy or European heritage being built in this song. And I kind of wish that I could hear a song that was about the American legacy or the American heritage in the same way. I'm sure those kind of songs exist, sure, but in kind of this same way, it'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, the kind of cultural DNA that defines you as a person. Yeah, and I think the song kind of begins by talking about a lady, but the lady is actually Europe,
right?
Like looking at the protagonist from across the water. There's a line here which was commented on. I took a look on the website genius.com. The line is that the faint reminders stand a visitor who took a hand 1,000 years ago or so. And they say there that it's been almost 1,000 years since England was successfully invaded by outsiders. It's sort of a cultural meme. That they haven't been invaded in almost a millennium. One of the things I know about that is that it isn't true, but the way that it isn't true is kind of hilarious. And I think just as a tangent, I will go into that briefly because I think it's a really funny tidbit of historical knowledge. The last invasion of mainland Britain actually happened in 1797. And it's referred to as the Battle of Fishguard. And it was carried out by revolutionary France, who landed on the shores of Wales. And the entire invasion lasted 3 days, and on the last day, the French general surrendered because they mistook Welsh women on the cliffs wearing traditional Welsh red dress for soldiers wearing red coats, and so believed that they were outnumbered.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah.
I've never heard about that.
Yeah, I extend my gratitude for that bit of historical knowledge to the technical difficulties, who are a group of funny British people. But yeah, it kind of doesn't really have a bearing on this song because there's nothing here in the lyrics that it was the last kind of invading visitor 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of general knowledge which is a little bit erroneous, and the story itself is so funny that it can stand another telling.
Yeah.
Track 4, Later That Same Evening.
Later that same evening she ran. I think she ran alone. Later she had heard.
Actually remember when you and I were first discussing kind of the possibility of this podcast, we tried talking about a scattered arrangement of songs, which you and I respectively chose. And later that same evening was one that you suggested.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of this, again, in the multi-part voice arrangement on this one, which feels like an incredibly strange choice. Because, well, it's obviously like a story being told from a single point of view, and having all those different voices coming from different sides doesn't really solidify what they're trying to bring across. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorites on the album.
Mm-hmm.
And we've mentioned, like you said before, that vocal manipulation is not something that's common in a lot of Tull stuff, so it's kind of notable when it happens. And this is, of course, one of the most preeminent examples of that, I guess. But I like it quite a bit. I think they don't use it too much, so I think they kind of use it just the right amount. It's kind of confined to specific sections and that kind of thing. And you have like those backing vocals that come in and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I like how, sometimes they get sort of off sync, which is kind of cool, I think. So if I remember right, there's kind of the verse that has the word scare in it, and the backing is kind of off of where it had been previously, and I think it sounds kind of cool.
Uh-huh.
But no, I like it in general. I think the vocal manipulation is cool on this one.
How do you feel about the oohs in the intro?
Oh, I love that.
Really?
In my notes, I have that as the orc chants, is how I described it. But yeah, I love the ooh.
Yeah, what are the orcs doing in this kind of spy novel?
Yeah,
espionage kind of situation. What is that? Why
actually,
is that the choice?
They come back in a later song too, but yeah, they're on this one.
Yeah,
I've always liked it. When I was a kid growing up, I always liked it. The drum part on this one is really interesting. It kind of, I don't know. I feel like that it kind of works with the orc chants, sort of in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of very kind of creative, interesting stuff happening on the drums in this one.
Mm-hmm. There's vocoder as well.
Yeah,
I think on the back kind of thing.
The one negative I would mention on this song, or one of the drawbacks, is the very old sounding string synth sounds.
Mm-hmm. There's actually more sound design in this song than just the vocal manipulation, because you've got the odd keyboard sounds on the last verse that kind of imitate sirens and other happenings which occur in the story of the song. They're kind of there, I think, to illustrate what's going on. Yeah, the submarine sound, which I love that so much. I'm a big fan of that. I actually remember when I was growing up, sometimes you have memories from when you were really young that you can't really explain why you have them, but you do. And I remember having a memory of being in the car with my dad on this song, and I remember him pointing out the submarine sound to me. And it's the way that you talk to a little kid, like, do you hear the submarine? Uh-huh. Do you hear it? Listen. And I remember my dad pointing that out to me when I was really young. So that's kind of a really early memory I have with the song. Yeah, that's kind of a Prokofiev kind of moment, right? Mm-hmm. Where you have sounds that represent specific things in music. Peter in the Wolf style, but here it's submarine. Yeah, because it's on beat is what I love about it. Like the sub pinging is on beat. I like the kind of jammy outro too. Yeah, it's the coda is very atmospheric. There's another live version of this song in that same clip I mentioned, and they kind of jam out the ending a bit more, and of course they have a proper ending for it instead of fading out, and it sounds really good, I think. Mm-hmm. Nice. But yeah, this is certainly, writing out the espionage theme, which is on a lot of this album, so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt when I was coming back to this album and sitting down to listen to it, I was surprised to discover that there's fewer kind of espionage and Cold War themes in the songs than I expected it to have. I kind of felt it was all that. Mm-hmm. But there is a scattering, a thematic scattering between the songs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't call it a concept album or anything, but it's there's a fairly dominant theme throughout most of the tracks. Track 5, Saboteur.
Following the trace you leave unwittingly, I wanna be no saboteur.
So this is kind of one of the big rocker tracks on the album, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I would actually say this is one of the more progressive tracks on the album, just in terms of music. It's kind of
Really?
cool how it focuses around that main guitar part. That's, the focus of the song structure.
The guitar sounds very kind of punk.
Yeah, I can see that.
Actually, the timbre of that, and this is like the most new wave track on the album. Probably the whole album is incredibly new wave, but this one is the condensed version of that.
Mhm.
There's a few things that I noticed about it. I really enjoyed the synth solo in the middle.
Yeah.
It's very cool, kind of a violin-like synthesizer. And well, one thing that sticks out here, and that you undoubtedly had a lot of personal experience with, was Ian missing Barry Barlow and programmed the drum machine to do the double kick throughout pretty much the entire song.
Yeah, so when I was this is a long story, but I'll try to shorten it. When I sat down to figure out how I was going to do the drum cover for this album, I had heard this album for years, but I had never really consciously paid attention to the drum parts that much before. So a lot of the work was just, me sitting down and really kind of mapping out exactly what's going on with the drum machine. And this was one song where when the double bass started, I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Because I thought, how the hell am I going to do this? But thankfully, it's a very easy double bass part. So, I'm not a metal drummer. I'm not used to double bass, but this was definitely doable for me. But it was annoying that I realized, oh crap, I'm going to have to rent a double bass pedal now to do this album. Something I was not at all expecting, of course.
There's a few things in the lyrics that I would like to discuss, and I actually have questions about. There's a couple lines I don't really get. But first, there's something I noticed here, which kind of fits into Ian Anderson's lyrical universe, which connects it to a later song, which is the line, "Misfortune like a sparrowhawk hangs over you," which we will encounter a sparrowhawk in the song "Sparrow on the Schoolyard Wall" on Catfish Rising. And it wouldn't have stuck out to me as much, but the whole of the two lines, "Misfortune like a sparrowhawk hangs over you, wanna be no saboteur," and the way that the "Wanna be no saboteur" is sung afterwards is melodically very similar to the line from the other song that goes, "But try to be a sparrowhawk." There's nothing wrong with sparrows, but try to be a sparrowhawk. And the melody on the "But try to be a sparrowhawk" is pretty much the same as the melody on "Wanna be no saboteur." In that specific place. And it just probably kind of Ian pulled the image of the sparrowhawk from his memory and inserted it into the melodic place that he associated with these words. So these two moments became a little bit similar. It is the way I feel about this.
Yeah, that's interesting. Catfish Rising is not an album that I'm familiar with very much, so I can't
I'm much
comment
more
much.
familiar with it than I think between Broadsword and Catfish Rising. I'm less familiar than with the three albums in between. And the other places in the lyrics which kind of confuse me here, so you may be able to help me. Like before this, the sparrowhawk line, "Painted ducks across your landscape, happy in your domesticity." What do you think the painted ducks are referring to? Because it might be just an expression which I'm not familiar with, but I get confused.
Well, it kind of makes me think of the white ducks,
Yeah, of course, but we now know that the white ducks are porcelain ornaments.
Right, which I didn't even know until you told me.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. Lyrically, this is never a song I've dug too deep into. To begin with, I've never really understood who the Saboteur is and what they're sabotaging, so I don't know.
It feels like it's connected to some kind of story or some kind of idea that was around at the time that Ian heard somewhere about people sabotaging something.
If I remember right, isn't there a lyric about Jesus in the temple or something like that?
In this one?
Yeah.
I'm not... Yes.
Yeah, that
celebrated like Jesus in his temple rage.
Right, yeah. Because I remember as a kid going to Sunday school and stuff, I always made the connection between, the story of Jesus in the temple and this song. There was always a connection there for me.
Yeah, that line makes sense. The ducks really kind of don't. And another moment, "I'm only removing broken seashells from the beach."
Yeah.
Also kind of mysterious and confusing to me. I might not just be aware of some of the things and imagery behind it that this song is supposed to refer me to.
On the guitar on this song, there is an effect that's used on this song and also a lot of other songs throughout the album. And I don't know technically what this would be called. I'm just going to call it the spacey Doppler effect, is how I would call it. And if you know what I mean, that it makes the guitar sound very elastic and spacey.
It doesn't feel to me like a specific effect. It feels like some processing done on that, maybe with multiple pedals and effects and amp settings, because it doesn't feel to me like a specific thing you can switch on. But yeah, I know what you mean.
There's a lot of other tracks where that song is whatever that effect is used a lot more than this one, so it's kind of emblematic of the way this album sounds to me. Yeah, the only other thing I have to comment on is just the drum part is pretty tricky on this one. There's a lot of weird stuff happening, and the double bass complicates it, but it's a very simple double bass part. I can thank Ian for that. It once it starts, it doesn't change at all, so that's kind of nice. But it is very strange. I mean, that's one thing I would love to hear Ian talk more about, is how he programmed the drums for this album, just because some of the choices that he made were just so off the wall when you think about how drum machines are usually recorded. And I'm interested too into how they recorded. I mean, was there a drum machine there first and then they recorded over it, or did they record first and then add a drum machine? I don't know.
Oh, must have been a drum machine first, some kind of. I don't think they would have just recorded everything to a click and then put a drum machine.
Well, I wonder if he went back again and tweaked things then, just because there's so many little spaces that just sound so specific that, it feels like it would be difficult to
That could well have been, yeah. They could have just programmed a simple beat, played to that, and then enhanced it.
Yeah, because one thing I noticed when I was kind of mapping out a lot of the drum machine parts is that for the kick drum, he often maps the kick drum to the bass notes, the bass guitar notes. And, I wonder which came first, if, Dave played where the kick drum was, or if Ian mapped the kick drum where Dave was playing. I don't know.
Yeah, kind of chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Track 6, Radio Free Moscow.
I'm getting pictures from my radio free Moscow, yeah. Keep getting pictures from my radio free Moscow.
This is the track where I noticed something about the entire album, which is that the album has a leitmotif. And the leitmotif is the Under Wraps theme. The vocal, not the chorus, the kind of vocal line on the verse. You keep it quiet, go slow. And that rhythmic idea happens in multiple songs across the album. And here you've got it in the bass line, in the very intro and the first verse. You can already clearly hear it. Bum, bum, bum. I think it's very intentional. I did talk on Broadsword and here's a line that sounds like Protect and Survive, and here's the part of Seal Driver that sounds like The Clasp. And I kind of criticized that because it felt like a lack of ideas, because it was just 2 songs on an album that shared an idea, and it didn't feel intentional. While here, in the entirety of Under Wraps, there are several places where the Under Wraps motif comes back in different songs and connects them together. Because it's multiple songs, because it's not just 2 places, I interpret that as a very conscious decision. Did you notice that when recording the covers?
You mean the music from the title track comes back? The melody and the rhythmic idea from the title track, which is on the title track, it is the lyrics, keep it quiet, go slow, circulate, need to know, this line. And you can hear this line, you can kind of hear these words in the bass line of Radio Free Moscow in the beginning. No, I've never noticed. I did, as you were talking just now, I kind of made the connection that there is actually quite a lot of lyrical talk about light and dark through a lot of different songs in the album, which I'd never noticed before.
Yeah, but the musical idea, ta-da-dum, dum-dum, ta-da-dum, dum-dum. I'm specifically not referring to any kind of notes in here, but this rhythmic motif will appear and reappear all again and again in different songs.
Well, that's interesting. No, I never made that connection at all. There actually are things that I discovered for the first time about this album when I was doing the cover, but we haven't reached any yet.
Otherwise, there's another song with a lot of vocal overdubs and unexpected things, which I don't enjoy.
I like it. This is a really light and optimistic sounding song for the most part. You know, there's parts that don't sound optimistic, but mainly the chorus is really like, you know, light and carefree feeling, and I've always liked that about this song.
Even though the story in the song is clearly not very light and carefree.
Yeah, I know. But something about the chorus it feels very bubbly and kind of in that wheelhouse.
I like the middle eight here with the guitar, the mandolin, and synthesizers combining very nicely. I think that's what they found works on Broadsword and the Beast.
It's really cool because it's kind of random. You know, just like a mandolin all of a sudden comes out of nowhere, and there's not really any. I don't think there's any mandolin anywhere else on the album, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I like how that place sounds. There's a line at the end, the kind of the chant that goes Moscow Radio.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something, but I can't remember what. It reminds me of something very much. So if any listeners have an idea what that might sound like, I would appreciate.
I like the radio samples throughout. It's pretty cool.
Well, they're kind of obvious, aren't they? Just this is a song about a radio. Let's put radio sounds in it. And this is one of the things I kind of find I don't really enjoy when there are obvious references to things that happen in lyrics used in the song. Like very specific things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, probably it's kind of one of my other problems that I have with the production ideas on this album.
My dad likes this album because he studied abroad in Austria when he was in college, and this was, of course, when the communist bloc was still around. And he said that he used to listen to Radio Moscow when he was in Europe, so this song kind of reminds him of that. I'm curious about the attitude towards America in the lyrics. You know, I don't know what perspective this song is supposed to be sung from, but I think they describe America as like mine of disinformation or something, which is kind of interesting.
Well, because that's what the Moscow propaganda would be doing.
Yeah, right. I don't know if I didn't know what perspective the song is about, if it's from the Moscow side or the other side.
Well, it's from the perspective is from a person who's listening to the Moscow radio, so clearly they are on that side. They might be the general, you know, who defects at the end of the album.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but you know, the people here would have been listening to Voice of America. You know what I mean? And not for the official, not to the official propaganda.
So, I mean, you didn't have any experiences with Radio Moscow growing up, did you?
No.
Yeah. There's a couple different tracks on this album that have kind of strange fade-outs, and this is one of them, where the song ends, but they still fade it out. Like, you know, the song ends, but it ends right at the fade-out, if you know what I mean. It's just kind of a strange decision, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like this one overall. It's a nice little song for me. I like listening to it.
That's great.
Track 7, Astronomy.
The cat walks alone under a big sky against the dark so thin and white.
So this is the first kind of extra track that wasn't on the vinyl.
Yeah.
This is another song that I would describe as a song that only Tull would write. You know, about astronomy and being naked with a telescope and that kind of thing. The space Doppler sound effect I mentioned before is used a lot on this song, and it, you know, for obvious reasons, it creates kind of a spacey sound through the whole thing.
Yeah, that's the kind of flanger, probably, something like that. Lyrically, this song confuses me a little bit because, on the one hand, yes, it's a song about an astronomer, and it's something that Ian does. He chooses a character in a landscape and tells a story about them. But this story kind of jumps around. So it begins with the protagonist in a traffic jam.
Yeah.
And then they suddenly aren't. And we don't return to the idea of the traffic jam. And I really get confused by why why it begins like that. The middle lane has trapped my car in red light claustrophobia. I slip the shackles, cut the rope, stand naked with a telescope. So it's an immediate shift.
Yeah, it's pretty sudden.
In what we are looking at. And also the refrain that the cat walks alone. I know Ian likes cats, but I don't make the connection between the cat walking alone and the rest of the story.
Oh, I think it's just scene setting. It's just a cat walking in the deserted streets at night under the big sky. I can see that lyric pretty well. That's like a big world builder for me.
Yeah, probably is. There's a place here in the lyrics that feels a little bit like filler. It is, I look and wonder, I feel no shame, see the consequences of the game. It kind of adds a feeling of an increased self-importance of this person who is imagining themselves to be more than they are.
Yeah.
Like the sort of beautiful mind moment. Is that the name of the movie? Obviously came out much later. I'm just referring to the kind of concept of a person who sees through things to what they really are when they actually don't. Yeah, I don't have a lot to discuss on this one. There's again some of the annoying vocal things like the hup, 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 or the or the astronomy at the very end.
The end, yeah.
Yeah, so one of my problems with these kind of vocal ad-libs is that a lot of them are just name of the song delivered in a very intense voice.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, most of them I like. I remember as growing up kind of being annoyed with the ending of the song, but it doesn't really bother me that much now. It is true, though, that a lot of... I'm kind of just now realizing this, funnily enough, that there are a lot of sections of this album where it's just repeating the name of the song in a funny way over and over. I would say on this one thing that I noted about it was that this was actually one of the most difficult drum songs to learn. There's a lot
I'd like to hear about
a lot of weird stuff happening here, and just so many things to pay attention to, very quick, fast things. So this one took me a lot of takes to get down. One interesting thing about the drum part is there's a snare effect, and I don't know if effect is the right word, but there's sort of a technique they use to get a certain effect on the snare. There's a part where during the verses, the snare is being hit several times, but every hit is in a different volume. And it creates this effect, kind of like the snare is getting close to you and then moving away, is the best way that I can describe it. It sounds really interesting. I don't know what better way I can put that in words, but that was something that was really difficult for me to emulate on a live drum kit, because the only way you can do that is just to try to do it with volume, which is especially difficult when you're playing it, notes very quick to each other.
Which is interesting, because I'm sure that the reason why they did it was to emulate the dynamics of a live drummer.
Yeah.
Right? To make the snare hits different from each other as a live drummer's performance would be.
Yeah, exactly. The part I'm talking about specifically is right after the cat walks alone under a big sky. There's several drum hits, and the volume of each of them is different. And that's just one example of the unbelievable attention to detail that Ian paid to the drum machine on this album, which is way beyond what most people would ever do.
Yeah. It's very clear that he wasn't interested in just playing to a 16-beat loop.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of this song is towards the end, there's a very sparse, I wouldn't call it a bridge, I guess it's a verse, a very sparse vocal part where the rest of the song kind of fades away. There's a drum loop that keeps going, and then there's guitar and vocals, and that's it. And I love that section just because the spaciness of the guitar is really able to reverberate kind of throughout the song, and it works really well with the astronomy theme, I think.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It's just a shame that it's my least favorite verse in this song. These lyrics really feel to me like I'm criticizing Ian's lyrics in some songs a lot, because for the very reason that I'm just expecting a lot from him, because I believe Ian to be one of the best lyricists in rock music, if not the best, if second best to, I don't know, Bob Dylan, because Nobel Prize. But so when I see lines like I can touch what I can see from Ian, I feel cheated. I feel like an effort hasn't been made.
There are parts to come on this album still that have lyrics that I really like. Actually, some of my favorite Ian lyrics still to come. So I'll try to point those out, and we'll see.
Track 8, Tundra.
Someone left their snowshoes in the Tundra.
again, name of the song in a menacing voice.
Yeah.
A lot in this one. The music in this one really insists on how intense the story should feel to me.
Yeah.
Which kind of seems a little bit forced, because it seems like they're trying to convince me it is serious. And again, there's a lot of kind of vocalizing, like the ha and the ow in the second verse, and the roar, or whatever you can call it, the moan.
Yeah.
In the middle. And the ending, I will not even talk about that.
This song's interesting for me because, like I mentioned, I grew up with a cassette that didn't have this song or General Crossing on it. So it created kind of an interesting lab experiment where I was able to actually hear part of this album way later and see how I reacted to it. And I guess maybe predictably, this is not a song I like on this album. So, and actually neither is General Crossing. So that's kind of interesting. And I agree with what you said, that they're trying really hard on this song to make it come across as serious or scary or whatever. And I don't really think it's that convincing.
Yeah, one thing I noticed in the lyrics on this one, a callback, I think pretty obvious one. I begin to get the feeling I've been on the stage before and I'm the only player.
Yeah.
Like, obviously a callback to, do you ever get the feeling that the story stood them real and in the present tense and everyone is on the stage and it seems like you're the only person sitting in the audience?
Totally. I don't care for this song much. I find it kind of boring. It's one of the more boring tracks on the album, I think. But some positives I have about it, I actually do like some of the lyrics, not all of them. But I like the last verse in particular, about like one more Arctic desert day trying to find the mystery that's haunting this whatever Siberian space. I think some of that's kind of cool. And I think the general concept is kind of interesting, about trying to solve a mystery of someone who disappeared, in a tundra with no snowshoes and no footprints to track and that kind of thing. It's kind of cool. And
I wonder where the story came from.
Yeah. I wonder if it was inspired by a novel or something. But I especially like at the end, my interpretation of what's happening at the end is that the same thing happens to the protagonist. There was a mystery in the tundra where somebody suddenly disappeared and nobody knows where he went, and then the person who was investigating it, the same thing happened to him. So some unseen force, caused him to disappear as well. And that's what I think is happening at the end with the vocalizations going on. Which I actually kind of like. I think it's kind of charming. Yeah,
I think I agree with you. Yeah, that the protagonist disappears themselves at the end, because at first, when the last verse comes in, the first lines, one more Arctic desert day, another set of shoes out in the tundra snow. It first occurred to me that it's probably another event, just like the first one. Like, people keep disappearing, and we're looking at it. We can't figure it out. And the protagonist just has it happen to him, to them over and over again. But I think the interpretation that it's actually the main character who's disappearing at the end works much better.
And the song kind of dies at the end. Like it kind of sounds like the song like runs out of batteries at the end. And I think the way it's paired with the vocals at the end, I think it kind of works. It sounds kind of cool and creepy, I think.
Yeah, it does. The fade to white out, as it were.
And even though I don't think this song is interesting musically, I still think that it does a decent job of trying to create like a tundra atmosphere musically. I think it does an okay job at trying to do that.
Yeah, this is not dissimilar to what some musicians who actually come from the areas that have tundra in them actually did musically. There's a Russian band called Yatkha, spelled Yatkha. And they have an album called Tundra's Ghosts. It's kind of intense electronic punk, and I think you can hear some of a similar atmosphere attributed to the tundra.
Yeah,
made by musicians from a very different place and a very different time. Well, 90s, but still different time.
On the drums, there's kind of a tom sound. It's not really a tom sound, but it's kind of used as a tom. You can hear it pretty easily in the first couple seconds. It kind of marks transitions between parts. It's kind of like a boom, 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 and it kind of sounds like a swipe sound. Yeah. And I don't really think that sound is used anywhere else on the album, so it's kind of an interesting thing to note in terms of the drum textures.
I wonder what could be used to kind of approximate that on a live drum kit. apart from just using toms.
Yeah, I use toms just because I figured that was the best thing to do. But it's one of those sounds that's not very easy to recreate. Track 9, Nobody's Car.
Black Volga following me, nobody's car. Mr. No One at the wheel of nobody's car.
I don't know about you, this is one of my favorites on the album. I think it's a real standout. You mentioned, so there's of course lots of vocal ad-libs. I really love them on this song. With "Are you on routine assignment?" and then the voice answers and then the whole thing about somewhere before I feel we've met, and then you have the "Hey, hello," that kind of thing in the back. I love all that stuff.
This is a song that I feel if they did it in the classic lineup, it would completely work.
Yeah.
This feels like a, well, I'm not trying to slag this album too much. This feels like a real Tull song, in the way that people talk about real Tull. It feels like something they could have in the 70s. And since I'm not too familiar with the live performances from that time, did they play it live a lot?
They played it on this tour. I don't think any under wrap stuff really survived much beyond the tour, but this song is great live. I think I encourage everybody to look up the live version of this because it sounds awesome, in my opinion.
Lyrically, I like that there's again a lot of espionage here, clearly, but it breaks the fourth wall a little bit because the protagonist kind of thinks the whole story looks like a book or a film.
Yeah.
So there's a self-awareness to it, which works well, I think. There's a moment, the musical moment, where it goes, "I want out alive, speak for me if you can." It goes up a semitone, and it's a kind of a really cool device to increase the sense of menace, because it goes up a semitone over the same bass line, and feels like someone is trying to get away.
Yeah. A lot of great keyboard parts on this song also.
I agree. What the song begins with, Black Volga following me, nobody's car, is the image of a black Volga something that feels exotic?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because, I wouldn't know. I don't know how strange this car may appear to people, because Volgas have been all around the place here. It was like one of the most popular, slightly more expensive cars. And then, of course, when they all began to get old, they were used as taxis. At one point in the early 2000s, I think most taxis in my town were Volgas. And then they just all gradually fell apart because they're actually really inefficient vehicles in terms of, I think, fuel consumption.
I don't know if they were that popular in America. I don't remember hearing the word Volga that much, but I'm not a car person, so what do I know? I think the bridge of this song is kind of the one shining electric guitar moment of the whole album, where you have the guitar kind of comes to the forefront and plays the key melody.
Like the one that's followed by the car horn.
I think so. Yeah. Which, when they played that live, Ian had an actual car horn, which he would use on stage.
Oh, that's funny. But again, there's another very literal element of the world building used in this song, and I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah,
it's another really intense song. It's just the energy on this one is just brimming, and I think it comes through even more in the live version.
It is intense, but this here I kind of feel that the intensity is justified by the story. We're being pursued.
Yeah,
and that's how it's supposed to feel.
So the ending is another of those parts you talked about, where it's just the name of the song over and over.
Yeah,
this is another song that I feel like it shouldn't have faded out, because there is an ending, and I think it works pretty well. I don't really know why they had to fade it out.
Yeah, some of the decisions kind of feel arbitrary. Why Astronomy ends the way it does, and nobody's car ends in a different way.
The only other note I had about this one is that there's actually China symbol programmed, which I think there may be one or two other songs after that also have a China, but that kind of stuck out to me when I noticed it.
You think it was a specific sample, or just a sample they manipulated to sound like a China symbol?
I think it's a China sample. That's what it sounds like to me. So I actually brought in a China when I played this song.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how it sounds. At time of recording, the Joey's drum cover has not yet been released, so I'm still anticipating to hear that.
It's in the works, but as you listen to this, it should be out, so feel free to go check it out.
Track 10, Heat. Again, a little bit of the annoying voice with "Get Out of the Heat." I don't have a lot to talk about on this one. And again, this is a very under-discussed album, right? There's not a lot of annotations and bits of information to be found online, but there is an annotation about this song on genius.com, and it's about the French line, "Trop tard sera le cri," which translates to "too late will be the cry." And it says that it's actually the first part of a sentence which Ian borrowed from a French school book he used in his teen years, and the full English translation of that line reads, "Too late will be the cry when the ice cream salesman has gone by."
So does that make you think of Passion Play?
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
I didn't know about that. That's cool. This song has always stood out to me as like the long epic of the album, if there is one, just because it's the longest track, and there's a ton of different sections just throughout this whole song. It changes a lot. This isn't one that I've always liked that much. I actually kind of agree with you that the voice is kind of annoying on this one. But I don't know, it's okay. I don't listen to this one that often. The bridge is pretty enormous. There's so many different sections of music packed in there into the bridge. It goes kind of through a whole roller coaster through the whole bridge, and even the orc chants come back a little bit, which I like.
Yeah, I didn't really have a lot of observations musically about this one. There's again a moment in the end of the bridge that feels to me reminds me of Queen a little bit.
I think I know what you're talking about, like right before it ends.
Yeah. The guitar part, obviously.
Yeah, the part right before that I kind of call the heaven moment, where you have like the angels singing and all that stuff, and it sounds really dramatic.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that there's not a lot of notes I have on this one, except for the French line.
One of the things I noticed on the drum part here is that some of the snares have toms with them, if you know what I mean. So he's playing snares and toms on the same beats, which is strange, and it's something I didn't try to replicate because it just would have been too difficult.
That's interesting.
There's a lot of really weird stuff about that on this album with the drums, where there's some parts that you just couldn't play faithfully with 2 arms. You know, you'd need 3 or 4 arms to play everything that's going on sometimes.
Yeah, that's one of the things you can do with the drum machine.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because obviously our conceptions of what drumming is shaped by 2-limbed, well, I mean 4-limbed, but 2-armed drumming. So when you create drum parts outside of that, it sounds strange.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I sometimes tried coming up with drum parts just using samples, and I realized that what I was coming up with was nigh impossible.
See, I think it's funny because if I was to design a drum machine part, I probably wouldn't do that because I'm so used to thinking of drum parts in terms of how you actually play them. One part on this song that has always stuck with me is the lyrics, "The rats are running and the boys are gunning." I've never understood what that means. I don't have any idea what this song is about lyrically, and there's stuff about taking your credit cards and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I have no idea what it's about. And this is another song where there's an ending and yet it still fades out.
I think lyrically it's just a song about kind of follows up from Nobody's Car. It's a song about a person on the run from something. So when the rats are running and the boys are gunning, it's just people who are after them.
Yeah. I guess I always imagined actual rats running and then boys gunning them or something.
No, I believe it's sort of the rat race metaphor or something like that.
Track 11, Under Wraps number 2.
Of your attention, we're an upkeep month of casual indifference.
So I think it was a great idea to have an acoustic song on this album, and it's kind of another decision that I think only a band like Tull would kind of have the balls to do that, to do an all-electronic rock album and then kind of have an inexplicable acoustic song in the middle of it. I think it was a good idea.
Yeah, so acoustic that Dave even plays a double bass on this.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier on the first Under Wraps how they keep the same backing vocals from the first version on this one, even kind of keeping the same effect on it. And it creates this really weird contrast, like not just an intensity contrast. Of course, there's a very big difference in intensity from the backing vocals to the lead vocals, but also kind of a sonic contrast with that effect still being on. It's almost like it was taken directly out of the first version and put in this one.
Yeah, it is an odd. It feels to me like an odd choice because the backing vocals have an intensity that this version of the song doesn't have.
Yeah.
And they sort of feel a little bit out of place for me. It's certainly a welcome break from Synth Central, which is the whole album. But I do again like with the first version of the song. I get the point of the lyrics. I don't get how this idea carries over in the music. So even though it sounds like the only song a regular Tull fan would enjoy on this album, probably. I think just from the point of view of the song itself, I'm not a big fan of it.
Yeah, I think it becomes much more of like a warm love song, is the way that I would describe it on this one. And I think it works pretty well. I enjoy both versions of this song, and I think it comes across really well acoustic. I think it was a really good idea to do this acoustic. There's a version of this song on A Little Light Music, which maybe people are familiar with. It's an entirely instrumental version for some reason, but it also sounds very nice.
Yeah, the acoustic arrangement is very interesting. I really like the bass lines on the acoustic double bass. Kind of a slidey bass sound.
And there was a tambourine, so there actually technically is real percussion on this album.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't have a lot to say about it. The only other thing I had was I like the ring out ending on the last chord. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, so probably the kind of the conflict that this song in its two versions presents to me. That in the first version, in the electronic version, the intensity of that to me kind of overpowers the love message in this song. And the tenderness of the acoustic arrangement clashes with the idea of the espionage idea, the metaphor of the person trying to keep their love secret.
Yeah, it's interesting. So for you, it's kind of in a limbo where it doesn't fit on either.
Yeah. And not lyrically, but the delivery of these parts. They still try to kind of carry over some of the intensity. And yeah, I do understand what they were going for here, but just personally for me, there is a disconnect between lyrics and music, and the two different ideas in the lyrics that the music doesn't kind of marry to, or marry them between themselves.
Yeah. This isn't from my notes. I'm just kind of realizing this off the top of my head, but I remember that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the lyrics on this version and on the first version. And I don't have notes to refer to, but I think the first version goes through more seasons and the second version doesn't. If I remember right, that's what's different. So in the first version, they mention, like winter and that kind of thing. And the second verse doesn't. The acoustic version just skips that verse entirely, where it mentions the seasons. So it's they just skip a verse on it.
Track 12, Paparazzi. Again, this song has the under wraps motif. The line, snap it up, flash away, steal a camel for a day. It's exactly the musical idea from Keep It Quiet, Go Slow. And this is kind of my big take from this song, that kind of it contributes to the integrity of the album, I think.
How do you feel about it musically?
It's very new wavy.
Yeah.
Not so much as Saboteur, but again on the straightforward, I think, new wave side of what they were trying to do. There's an interesting thing in the drum part happening. I'm noticing like the kind of the cymbal lines where these difficult to deliver. Yeah, this song and Astronomy were the two hardest ones on the whole album. I mean, I was kind of surprised that this one was so difficult, just because from remembering what this song sounded like, I didn't expect this one to present a lot of problems, but it was really tricky. So, and this drum part is also a good example of the kick drum and the bass notes together. There's a lot of that happening on this song.
For my opinion on this song, I don't care what you guys say. This song is a total banger. This is one of my favorites on the whole album. Like, this is one of my favorite Tull 80s tracks ever. I think this song is awesome.
What do you like about it? Kind of the...
The guitar line is awesome. I think just the central guitar line is really good.
Mhm.
And it just makes the song really catchy. And I like, you know, I mean, you probably don't like this, but there's lots of, you know, Ian vocal ad-libbing on this song, and I like it a lot. Like, he kind of follows the bass guitar going up, like the oh. I think it sounds really awesome.
Uh-huh.
And this is another. It's a very energetic song. It's really intense.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. Again, it's a song about a character
Hmm.
chosen from, I don't know, a string of characters and ideas that Ian was probably exposed to at the time.
One lyric on this one I never understood was, I looked it up, and the lyric they had written was "steal a camel for a day," but I always heard it as "steal a camel for him." Is that like an expression that's used somewhere?
I really don't know. Steal a camel for it. It does confuse me as well. It's kind of the only hits Google comes up with is this song.
Yeah. I don't know. That was always a lyric I never understood. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, I only know this because of my Tull map, but I think Morocco is mentioned on this song, so I guess it's part of the Morocco theme.
Yeah, and actually, I googled it wrong just now because I just automatically typed "steal a camel for a day" in quotes. And of course, the hits were only for this lyric, but just googling "steal a camel" yields an Egyptian proverb. The proverb goes, "If you love the moon. If you steal a camel."
Okay.
So the kind of do nothing by half, right? But it's interesting that it means do nothing by half, but it's steal a camel for a day. So don't do it by half, but still do it just for a day. So it is kind of funny in that regard.
Oh, Tangier in Morocco. Okay, that's what I'm thinking of.
Tangier, yeah. Yet another reference from a prog rock band in the 80s to Tangier, because of course King Crimson has a track called Saboteur in Tangier.
So Martin likes this song a lot. Martin's actually credited on this song. Or he is credited for writing this song, or at least partially writing it.
I think kind of there's supposed to be a lot of credit to different Tull members on this album, like Peter Vitesse among them. Like this was one album where not all the songs were exclusively credited to Ian.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video recently of Martin's band actually playing this song. Within the past couple of years. I don't think it was like a reworked version, like it didn't have vocals. I think it was like an instrumental, but they at least have been playing it. And but the drummer was not playing the real drum part, which I don't blame him for, because the drum part in this one is so weird. It's kind of offbeat, which is part of what makes it so strange. But yeah, I love this one. It has a fake out ending too, kind of a weird little fake out ending.
Yeah, I don't think I noticed the fake out ending the first time.
Track 13, Apogee. I have a lot to talk about on this one, actually. This is, I don't know if I would call this one of my favorites on the album, but it's really mysterious. Like, there's a lot of things happening on this one and a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah, quite long as well compared to the others.
I think part of what the mystery comes from is just I have no idea what the apogee is that's being mentioned in the lyrics. To be honest, I normally don't really care about lyrics that often, at least for certain eras of Tull. But this is one song where I like a lot of the lyrics on here, and I find them really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's one of those words that some loan words, like Latin loan words or Greek loan words, exotic in English and not really exotic in other languages. So it's immediately obvious to me what the word means, because it's just widely used in other languages to mean either specifically an astronomic concept of the farthest point in an orbit from the object something's orbiting, like the farthest distance from the Earth to the Sun in course of the year is the apogee of the orbit, or because it comes from the Greek word meaning just the apex.
Right, yeah.
It's just the highest point of something. And so, yeah, this is just sort of an ordinary, familiar word to me.
Yeah, like I know what the word means. It's just that it's kind of it's used to mean different things in the lyrics, is what it sounds like. So there's a lot of points where it's being used to describe a place where some terrible things are happening, and there's also, like, I think at one point it's kind of used to describe some kind of like being or machine or something, is kind of what it sounds like with the stainless veins of steel or whatever. So it's always been interesting to me how like the apogee is used so ambiguously throughout the lyrics here, and a lot of the lyrics, they kind of sound like it's a sci-fi version of Moby Dick or something, is kind of what's going on for some of it.
Oh yeah, that does sound like that, but I don't think the character in this song is after something specific like Moby Dick. It feels to me like this is a song about an astronaut who just goes rogue, who just wants to leave the space station.
Yeah.
And just drift out into the unknown. Probably the apogee is that's being referred to is the point in the orbit of the space station where it's easiest to leave the orbit, because it is the farthest, and the moment of inertia would be such that you can, as it were, jump out of the craft and fly away into space.
Yeah. Musically, this song has a really strange rhythm, which it took me a little bit to get down, but it wasn't that hard once I got it. But it has a really strange beat and rhythm throughout the whole thing, and it's actually quite reggae-ish, which is kind of interesting because, you know, Tull doesn't do that too often.
Yeah, might be a Police influence.
Yeah, it could be.
The Police used to have much of a reggae sound before their hit album Synchronicity.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of observations here, but I enjoy this song. In terms of mixing of the album, this is the quietest song on the album. Actually, it's quieter than European Legacy.
You know, actually, now that you say that, I think I noticed that when I was going through and practicing, that I was having to turn my speakers up for some songs. That's weird, because I mean, the whole point of mastering is to fix that problem. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it is a remaster we're listening to.
Yeah,
still, it's
maybe a Bosch remaster, maybe.
Could be, yeah. I like this kind of the psychedelic verse of "Beware a host of unearthly daffodils,
totally
drifting golden, turned up loud."
The way the synths sound on that bridge is awesome, and the same kind of sound comes back in the outro. Now that I'm looking at these lines and thinking about the story in this song, it reminds me a little bit of Ulysses, Odysseus, where he is the episode with the sirens, where he asks people to tie him to the mast so that he can experience the alluring song of the sirens. And this is the kind of a character that's drawn to something outside. Well, it's not really similar to that story, but I think I'm thinking of Ulysses just because they are in a ship, right? And it's a person on a ship that's being kind of seduced by something outside, something they might be hallucinating. Yeah. But they want to follow up on that, and they want to leave and pursue that which they see. Yeah, there's a big sense of threat in this song, which I think is actually portrayed pretty effectively, which doesn't come through a lot in a lot of other Tull songs. There's a misheard lyric on here for me. Okay. For a long time, I found out the real lyric a couple of years ago, not recently, but when I was growing up, I always thought the lyric was, "There's a monster loose in here climbing up the walls," because that makes sense. But then, no, it's "the wrong stuff's loose in here," which is a way less cool lyric, I think. I think it's a cool lyric. I just don't really understand it. In the lyrics on the CD booklet, the wrong stuff is actually capitalized. Really? That's funny. Yeah. So he clearly meant something. I have another misheard lyric on the next song, which is a much funnier misheard lyric, which I'll get to. I really love some of the lyrics on this song, though. Yeah. I like the one about, so hoist the skull and bones, death and glory's free. And I especially like the very end about, goodbye, cruel world that was my homeland. There's bigger space out here to roam. Put my feet up on the moons of Mars. Sit back, relax, and count the stars. I really like that. Yeah, that's our character kind of leaving everything behind, springing into space alone. Because, well,
That's how I'm imagining this, right? They're on a space station. I don't think they have like extra boats there that the protagonist can commandeer and fly away.
Mhm.
I'm just imagining a person in a spacesuit just jumping off into space.
Yeah, I'm actually just realizing whenever I heard the lyric, put my feet up on the moons of Mars, I was thinking like figuratively of a guy, like a giant guy walking around space and literally putting his feet up on the moons of Mars. But I see now it's...
Could be how they feel themselves to be.
Yeah.
The explorer that's just walking on top of, stepping from planet to planet.
Mhm. I like the space chatter too. At the beginning and throughout. And one of my bands, we had an album where we actually did a thing like that, which it was partly inspired by this song and partly inspired by another song.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I like the quote at the end too. It's kind of cheesy, but I kind of like it. And that actually brings up something interesting because on the vinyl edition of the album, this is the last song.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I think this song is a way better album closer than what actually ends the album on the CD.
Oh, yes, I totally agree with that.
And that actually made me think, because, I mean, it feels to me, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but this song kind of feels like it's intended to be a closer. And so it's kind of odd how they're, the two songs that are after this one.
Yeah, it feels so musically and thematically as well, and on an Apogee.
Yeah.
Right? So why did they decide on this specific track listing? Okay, they wanted to include these four extra songs, but why put them there?
Yeah.
I do agree. I'll try listening to this album again as if it were the vinyl version, just removing the 4 extra tracks and see how I feel about that, because kind of probably a shorter album with a slightly different flow would feel different to me.
Yeah, I've actually never tried that, but I should do that too. One last thing on this one, I actually love the hiccups, like the little vocal, like the whoop, whoop, whoop. I love those.
Okay.
And so at the very end, you can hear Ian counting stars, which I like. And this may be wrong, but I think he's panning in and out of each ear as he counts, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that moment.
And when we did our trivia with the momes, I was thinking if I wanted to be really evil, I could ask the question, how many stars does Ian count at the end of Apogee? Because I've actually sat and counted before. I think it's like 44 or something.
No one would get that.
Yeah.
Track 14, Automotive Engineering. My immediate thought about this song was this was kind of a callback to 4-wheel drive. Another, more, we need more opinions of the vehicular persuasion from Mr. Anderson, and this is another one. I don't really have a lot of things to say musically about this one, but I kind of came to a thought as I was listening to this song. Overall, there's a lot, the songwriting on this album, it feels like a little bit like just he took a stack of newspapers, he cut out the articles he thought had interesting words or ideas in them, and then wrote songs based on these articles. It's kind of a challenge.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, this is not a criticism. This is not I'm not saying like he was out of ideas, because clearly he wasn't, based on the subsequent albums. But just the breadth of themes that he covers, sabotage and snowshoes in the tundra, all of this stuff feels like it could have come out of a newspaper, telling about the sensational things that happened around the world. And if you will, it's kind of a thick as a brick connection. Because it's like a thick as a brick inside out. It's a real life newspaper turned into songs. That's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, I can see that.
At this point of the album.
My feeling on this song is I could see how someone could call this kind of a gimmick song, I guess. Because, it's kind of playing with the gimmick of like the factory sounds or whatever. Yeah. But I think it's kind of cool. I don't know. I don't love it, but I think it's okay. It's not one that I listen to that often on my own, but I think it's all right. There's
a moment in this song that is probably peak 80s, feels like to me, and it's the coda. It kind of sounds like a video game.
The Automotive Engineering chorus.
the ending with the synths and various keyboard sounds, it just goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum.
Oh yeah.
It feels a little bit like video game music.
Yeah, I actually kind of like that because I like how the guitar is following all that, like very staccato. I think it's kind of cool. But I see what you mean. There's the bridge of this song especially is kind of too much, I think. When he starts talking about the robots at the factory and all that, it's kind of
Yeah, I don't really get why he wanted to write a song that way.
So my misheard lyric on this song,
Yes.
I actually didn't notice this until like this year, like when I was doing the preparation for the drum cover. For years, I thought this lyric was "the Jets are coming," but no.
I thought it would be this.
No, it's "the Japs are coming."
Isn't that considered a slur today?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like, this is probably like unironically the most cancelable thing in the Tull lyric, like discography now.
Yeah.
And then it's followed by like a little Oriental like melody thing, which I had never made the connection that I just somehow that connection was never made before, so it's pretty funny.
Yeah, well, it's in the vein of a lot of things on this album being very illustrative, being like in your face kind of sounds.
Yeah.
We're singing about this, and here's a sound that means that.
Yeah, very fitting for the 80s though. You're right with the whole 80s newspaper thing.
Yeah, so this is like an article about a factory and about the advances in automotive engineering. And some of the lines feel like they've been just pulled straight out of an article.
Yeah.
No humans testing, and carbon fiber is the way to go.
Yeah. It's worth noting, one of the main like call-outs on this song is science and engineering. And if you remember on Radio Free Moscow, they pull out a lot of samples from the radio that are saying science and engineering. That's kind of like a link between those two.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then there's sort of another fake-out ending on this one. Track 15, General Crossing.
He's crossing. It's an old profession. He's crossing. Of subtle artillery. He's crossing. Rough wheels meshing. He's crossing. Button out.
So we finally come to the end. This is a long album. This song, before this year, if you asked me about this song, I would have told you that this is hands down one of the worst songs that Jethro Tull has ever made. But weirdly enough, like I still don't like it. I still don't really listen to it, but I kind of have a weird appreciation for it after having listened to it a bunch doing my drum video. And I'm not really sure why, but something about it kind of clicked a little more with me. But I still think this is kind of a low point.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel amazing. The under wraps motif makes a comeback. Is it dum 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 at the beginning of the song? So 4 songs in total, I think we've counted, that use this musical idea. One of them being the ostensibly a bonus track, right? Arguably, I like the line "The tall general flies by the seat of history."
Yeah.
It's a pun, but it's very well constructed.
There are actually some lines on here I kind of like. I like the whole theme of button out, button in, that kind of comes in and forth. I wonder if this is based on a real historical figure.
I'm not sure. I don't think there have been defects on that level. The last line, "He's going to be a general ski," is of course very funny to a Russian or Ukrainian speaker, because this is the way English speakers make things sound Russian or Slavic.
Yeah.
But it is actually a word in Ukrainian and Russian, generalski. It just means pertaining to a general. So it's a suffix that turns things into an adjective. So yeah, so he was a general, and he's going to be just something like a general, but not quite a general, which is of course not what Ian meant there. But yeah, turned out like that.
It's worth mentioning this is the other track that I didn't grow up with that wasn't on the cassette. And so it's interesting how I don't really like both of those songs that I didn't hear back then. And it's interesting the vocal parts that you found annoying. I mean, part of the reason I don't like this song is because of the really annoying "he's crossing." that whole thing going on. I really don't like that. So maybe that's more proof that if I heard this album today, I wouldn't like it.
Yeah, it could be. But yeah, nostalgia is a powerful feeling. And having a connection with an album means a lot. Like it does to me. That I have a connection with Broadsword and the Beast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I might well not have liked if I listened to it today for the first time. I can make a kind of a tenuous connection to like prog bands of the 70s and the lyrics here, just because there's a couple words, a couple phrases really close together.
Mm-hmm.
It says, the tall general will mine a few bridges tonight, stroking soft machinery. Soft Machine is a band. Kind of jazz rock, fusion, progressive Canterbury band. And the next line is Fanfare at Dawn, which, because I've just heard Soft Machinery, makes me think of a track by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Fanfare for the Common Man, which is, it's not a connection, it's just an association, I guess. Fun to think about.
Yeah. I don't have a lot musically on this song.
Mm-hmm.
Just two things I would note is in the drum part, there's kind of an interesting kick drum part where there's a very fast, sudden kick drum part, which is trying to follow the keyboard part, and that was kind of interesting to deal with. It's hard to describe in words, but I think if you heard it, you'd know what I mean. And then I like at the end how the guitar kind of joins in on the main keys melody, just on the last couple bars. That's like probably my favorite part of the song.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a weird choice for the last track, I think. It doesn't work that well.
Yeah. It completely doesn't.
I think the very end of this song, it ends on two hits. Like, he's definitely crossing.
Crossing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of cool as an ending, but Apogee is such a better ending for the whole project, I feel like.
Yeah, I think so too. There's a funny line there. He takes the battle plan and contemplates his fly.
Yeah.
Makes me think of Stuart Wood has a playlist created on Spotify called The Pants of Jethro Tull, and this song is on there as well.
Oh yeah, you mentioned
that. Kind of collected songs that have a reference to pants or underpants or just kind of general discomfort in the pants area.
There's a little cute part too where he kind of ad-libs like a private, where there's kind of a part where he said the general points somewhere and says bang bang, and then he has the little ad-lib in the back where he goes all right. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, well, consistent with the rest of the album for sure.
Yeah, but this isn't one of my favorites. I don't have a lot on it. It's for a long time I hated the song. I definitely would have picked it as one of the worst ever album tracks, and I still don't like it, but something about it kind of resonates more with me now for whatever reason. Right, so in conclusion, I've heard this album a lot in the past several months, of course, because I was doing my whole project, but when I listened to the album then, I was listening in a very strange manner because I was listening to specific tracks over and over, and I was focusing specifically on music and nothing else. So when I got the chance to listen to this in preparation for this episode, it was kind of the first time I had really sat down and listened to the entire experience of this album from front to back in a while. And I have to say that I still really thoroughly enjoyed listening to this, just the last couple of days when I was preparing for this. And this is kind of repeating myself from the beginning, but I know there's lots of criticisms about this album, and most of which I think are totally valid. I don't really have any arguments against a lot of the criticisms. Yeah, I think it's really old sounding. There are parts where they tried to go for a poppy sound. I understand why people find the drum machine annoying, even though it doesn't bother me personally. But all things considered, for me, it just doesn't really drag it down that much for me. And the way that I would describe this in kind of talking about the legacy of the discography as a whole, there's no way that this album competes with like the best albums of the 70s for me. I'm not trying to say that like I would put this album up there with like Thick as a Brick or Songs from the Wood or whatever. I think a good way of putting it is I think this is a good album. Do I think it's a good Jethro Tull album? I don't know. That's kind of a different question. But of course, I think it gets more hate than it deserves. I think that the unbridled hatred for this one is pretty extreme, in my opinion, of course. But is it a great album? No, I wouldn't call it a great album. But I don't think that means it sucks. And of course, it has a place in my heart for various reasons.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Isn't there a YouTuber who ranked Jethro Tull albums and named this one as their absolute favorite?
Yeah, Eugene and I just found this recently. I have his name written down here, actually, and there is no way I'm going to pronounce this right. but it's like Ales Picard, ALES Picard, European guy. And I was very amazed to see this Tull ranking video where he ranked Under Wraps as number 1. So, of course, I was happy to see another Under Wraps fan. But, I mean, don't get me wrong. Under no circumstances would I ever rank Under Wraps my favorite Tull album. It doesn't touch the 70s albums to me.
Yeah. No, I don't really have a problem with you liking it or Mr. Picard liking it as well. But yeah, I don't think it's an album I will be coming back to a lot. I will come back to it one more time, definitely, because I really want to listen to the sort of vinyl track listing and see how I feel about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, it's clearly my least listened to Tull album.
Do you like it less than A?
Yeah, I think I do like it less than A, but I think if it was given a treatment, the Steven Wilson treatment, at least bringing down the drums, making them sound softer, like in a Genesis way, if they took a page out of Genesis's book and made it less harsh, made it softer drum sound, brought the keyboards to the front more, and kind of rebalanced everything, I think I would have enjoyed it more.
What would your favorite tracks be if you had to name any?
I think my favorite tracks on here would be European Legacy and Apogee. I think these are two that I actually enjoy, and yeah, I will repeat myself that European Legacy could have been a hit. I firmly believe that now. And least favorite tracks, I don't know, maybe Automotive Engineering would be the lowest point probably for me. Maybe, well, I've listened to this album very recently, right? And listened to some tracks multiple times to try and come up with things I have to say about them. And now that I'm looking at the track list, I'm also noticing that I really can't recall how Heat sounds, even though we've just talked about it and I just had it in my ears, and I still can't recall it. So maybe not the bottom track, but one of the probably the least memorable tracks is Heat to me.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of funny. This is the one album that I think we've done so far where I actually had the most trouble figuring out my favorite tracks because there were so many that I wanted to mention, funnily enough. But so I tried to narrow myself to 3. And if I had to pick 3, I would say the best on here are Paparazzi, Nobody's Car, and Later That Same Evening. But there's a lot of others that I wanted to mention. For least favorite, the ones that stick out, General Crossing and Tundra are for sure the 2 I like the least. And then I would also put Lap of Luxury in there as one that I don't like much.
Yeah, I can see that.
Thanks everybody for listening. This was a very long episode, so if you made it this far, we really appreciate it, especially on an album that's not super popular. We'll see you all in 2 weeks with Crest of a Knave.
Cheers.
Thanks.